The Nationals are calling for nuclear energy to be added to Australia's mix in a bid to reduce emissions and improve reliability. In a letter to the Prime Minister, they've also called for a national energy summit to find long-term solutions to Australia's energy needs. Joining me live now is the Deputy Nationals Leader Perin Davey. Perin, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to AIM Agenda. The Treasurer was asked about nuclear yesterday, and he says the economics just simply don't stack up. He's right, isn't he?
Well, is he right? I mean, one of the biggest problems we've got in this country is that we're just not looking at it. We haven't done the investigations. We haven't considered the new nuclear technologies that are out there. We haven't done the business case, because every time someone mentions nuclear power, it's just back off, we're not going there. We're saying we need to have that conversation. We need to do the studies. We need to do the investigations, and we need to see if it does stack up. Because the other question is not just the financials to build it and operate it, but also the security, the energy security and the stability it provides to our communities. There's got to be a cost benefit in that.
Sure. And I think many people want to have that debate, but it's a bit rich. You're out of power. You've been out of power just 3 weeks, but your government were in power for 9 years. It's something you didn't do. Now you're asking the opposition to do it?
Well, they're now the government. We're the opposition, unfortunately. But the Nationals were calling for the conversation to be had. I certainly spoke about it in the Senate. We had actually drafted some legislation that we were in talks to be able to bring forward. Yes, we're now out of government, but we were certainly trying to start the conversation, and I think that's where Australia needs to go. We are the only country in the G20 that actually has a legal ban on nuclear power, yet we're the third largest uranium producer in the world.
Yeah, sure, but I guess my point is, and I don't want to labour on this too much, is that you couldn't even convince your own Prime Minister to look into this more deeply at the time. Now you expect the opposition to do it?
Well, one of the things that we were also talking about with the Prime Minister is how we transition to the net zero. And when we had that conversation, we said technology, not taxes. Part of that mix was also, let's have the conversation about nuclear. Yes, there are some people who just don't want to go there, but that Australia's got to sort of move on. It's no longer the 70s and 80s. We no longer have the nuclear disarmament party. And even Greens voters are now saying nuclear should be considered because it is low emissions, zero emissions power that provides a baseload.
Okay, well, it is still enormously expensive, isn't it? And it does take years to build. This new technology is getting faster and cheaper, but when could you see it here, and would it really be cheaper for customers?
Well, again, that's the investigation. That's the conversation we need to have. But if we don't start talking about it now, it's just going to delay it further and further. Yes, it takes time to build. Let's have the conversation. Let's do the business case. And then if it's going to stack up, or if we want to do a pilot, let's get that built to see how it works. Because people are talking about hydrogen. Everyone's getting really excited about hydrogen. I don't hear people raising the same questions about hydrogen, about the cost, the expense, green versus brown versus blue hydrogen. And the other thing is, I don't hear people saying, where's the water coming from to produce hydrogen? So if we're talking about hydrogen in that long-term view, we need to also talk about nuclear with a long-term view, because the more we delay, the more chance and risk we've got in the future as our coal-fired power plants are ageing, that we face more of the crisis that we're in at the moment.
Does this proposal, though, threaten to reignite the energy and climate wars we've seen for the better part of a decade or two?
I don't think so, certainly not. In fact, it helps us deliver on our net zero by having these conversations about hydrogen, about hydro, about nuclear. It helps us get to net zero by 2050, which all parties are now on board with.
Okay, but we heard from business yesterday, and there's so much palpable frustration around this particular debate, not nuclear per se, but essentially they say the political class has been fighting over the path to net zero for too long. Do you accept that a lack of bipartisanship has got us to this point?
Oh, absolutely. And let's trace it back to the history. When the Greens actually blocked a carbon tax just because it wasn't going far enough. I mean, it's crazy. And now we're still where we are today. All parties are now at net zero 2050. The only variation is how fast we get there and how we get there. Now, the Nationals are very, very committed to the fact that we don't want to see taxes, we don't want to see tariffs, we want to see incentives, we want to see soil carbon sequestration, we want our farmers recognised for the work they do in sequestering carbon in their soils. We want to see farm forestry acknowledged. We want to see that sort of carbon trading, but we don't want to see taxes because it is, at the end of the day, it is the Australian community, the Australian people that end up paying the taxes.
Indeed. And just one final question on this. Given that we've just had an election, the Teals, Labor, the Greens have a pretty clear mandate. The Nationals have a mandate too. But how are you going to operate in this space? Do you agree that you need to be more cooperative? Do you accept Labor's mandate on things like energy and climate policy? And can you bring a little bit more of that bipartisanship to the Parliament?
Well, we'll see what the Parliament brings forward, first and foremost. We won't support proposals that, for example, in the past were locking up productive farmland, all in the name of lowering emissions. That sort of proposal, that sort of policy has to be in the past. But we will support ongoing accreditation of biodiversity. We will support ongoing accreditation of farmers' soil carbon, that sort of thing. The interesting thing about the Teals, however, is that in the regions, it didn't matter who held a regional seat, whether the Nats or the Liberal Party or the Labor Party, the regions predominantly voted for stability. The regions voted for the party that was in at the time. Where people voted for Teals, where people voted for Greens, is where people can afford the risk of change. Whereas regionally, you know, $20 extra on someone's power bill is a real hit. In the seat of Wentworth, maybe less so. So I do think that while those people have a mandate in their constituencies, we need to govern for all of Australia. The government needs to govern for all of Australia, and they need to be very cautious about the unintended consequences of policies and the impact they'll have in our regional areas, which have some of the lowest socioeconomic demographics in the country.
Absolutely. Well, I don't think we've ever done a cross live to Denelquin. So, Perin Davey, thanks so much for your time. We hope to do it again soon.
Thank you very much.